Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Poultry Keepers 360 Live. It's been a long day. I've had two grandsons here today, so just forgive my goofers. Um, Tonight, we're going to be talking about in just a very short time how to take care of your birds during the winter. Now, I know y'all know I'm from Florida, and I know we don't have a whole lot of cold weather here in Florida, but I've seen it down as low as 12 degrees here. But I admit I do not have much cold weather poultry experience. So we're going to lean heavily on Jeff and Karen to lend their expertise, and I'll jump in where I can. So here we go. Let's get started. Karen? All right, and the whole gang is here, and we got our bells on and ready to ring this thing off and get started. So I thought we'd start off by talking about coops, um, and this is something that a lot of folks, I think everybody's coop's different from everybody else's. It's what works for us and what works for our birds. But the main thing to remember about birds in the wintertime is that your real enemies are drafts and humidity. Now, when it would get cold here, get down to 20 or below, I would take my large red males and I would put them in my show transport boxes and bring them into the garage. But other than that, they didn't get any special treatment because I knew that, you know, our coops down here in Florida are fairly open because we deal more with heat than cold weather. But I know that, or I knew that they could get drafty, and I wanted to try to eliminate that as much because that's when you start having frostbite on combs and uh, freezing tips and a little damage to wattle. So that I would take that step. But the ventilation uh, is is really key and really important. And we've got a little slideshow here, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Uh, Poultry coop ventilation, and Karen, if you now this is obviously not a poultry coop, but I wanted to throw this slide in here to give you an example of the different types of ventilation. But just remember the rule of thumb that the cool air is going to come in at the bottom and go out through the top. So if you can design your coops to take advantage of that natural airflow, that way you can have good ventilation. You can evacuate the moisture that's in the air, but you can prevent your birds from being in a draft. Let's go to the next slide. And a lot of us have trees and shrubs around our coops, uh, and that can make a difference in the airflow. Uh, if you look at the top, there's no landscaping there, and there's nothing to help get that air coming down into the coops where we need it. But with just a little bit, you look down at the bottom, uh, you can get flow coming in there by using large uh, leafy trees up above and then shrubs down below your air intake. So you can get that cross flow through ventilation there. Karen, let's go to the next one here. Wind movement will determine a lot of your airflow. Number one is that top to bottom airflow. Um, and number two is sort of a combined pattern airflow, which, like you would see in a two-story or house or coop. Number three takes advantage of partial walls, and I have seen some coops designed for this that were used up north that were done by Cornell University in their plans, and they would use this flow to get the flow off the birds so there was no drafts, but still to evacuate the moisture and bring fresh air in. Let's go on to the next
Let,
slide. Here.
let me
Yeah, go for it.
um Jeff, I don't know if you can simplify it, but I know you have a whole lot of knowledge about replacement air and like how many times per hour and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So you want, I mean, ideally, you want 100% of your air to be exchanged, new air coming in a 24-hour period. So whatever the size of your coop is, you want all of that air. It'd be great if every 4 hours that air changed. And winter's coming, and this is like the worst time of the year for me, for people calling with different health issues, and it really comes down to they actually button up their birds too tight, right? They overdo it. They worry about their birds getting cold, and the temperature is way down on the list of things that is going to affect their birds. Air quality is number one. If it stinks in there, if it's poor air quality, we're just inviting coryza, MG, other respiratory type diseases. So just go in there and I mean, what I tell people to do is nothing more than a bathroom exhaust fan. The little 12-inch that you buy at Home Depot or Lowe's. You put it at one end of the coop, and at the other end you put a vent to allow air in. This is up at the top. In between there, hang like heavy cardboard or something that forces the air to tumble. Okay. It only needs to hang down and block so the air can't go straight across from the vent to the fan, right? So you're causing air tumbling, kind of like picture number 3, but not, so yeah, I mean, if we're hanging some baffles down from the ceiling, that forces the air to mix at mid-level. It doesn't, you don't hang the baffles all the way to the ground. You just have to come down, 2 to 3 feet, enough to disrupt the airflow between the vent and the fan. So putting in a cheap exhaust, bathroom exhaust fan and putting that on a timer, if you get a pin type timer, you can set it to run 4 different times a day. So every 4 or 5 hours, you can set it, it'll come on, it'll run for 20 or 30 minutes, right? And then right after it's done running, you ought to walk in there and just see what the smell's like, okay? And just see how stinky, how humid it is. Humidity is going to build up in there just from their respiration, from their manure, from their spilled water, whatever. So humidity and low oxygen content are going to be your 2 worst nightmares as far as air quality in the hen house. And I see it every year. I get lots of calls. My hens are snotty. There's stuff coming out of their eyes. They're not doing well, or worst case scenarios, they're dying. And you hate to get that call, but it really comes down to people just don't worry about the cold, worry about the air. Okay. These birds are good down to about 20 degrees Fahrenheit without a problem, right? They're
Jeff, would pieces of old carpet hung
yeah,
up work for that?
yeah, yep, yep. Anything like that, I don't care if it's heavy cardboard, old carpet, anything that's going to disturb that air. And, so it has to kind of come down around, that baffle. And then that's going to cause some circular, like, mixing of the air. And that's going to pull a lot of that ammonia that's sitting down near the bedding. It's going to kind of, get it up out of there. But you're not shocking the birds with this instantly cold temperature.
Right.
It's going to mix, right? So the temperature inside the coop is going to go down gradually, and it'll come right back up again through body heat and deep bedding and composting and all that other stuff. So yeah, don't don't get all hung up about temperature. Make sure they got good air.
All right, I'll let you go back, Rip. Sorry about
Okay. Let's go on to the next slide. This is another Cornell design, and I've indicated the air intake areas with the blue arrows and the exhaust areas with red arrows. But their baffle is or air control is just simply a board on a hinge that they can control how far down that board falls, so they can let in a little bit of air, they can let in more air, and they can exhaust more air. But it comes in on the ground, then goes up and circulates out through the roof on that particular coop design. Some good friends of mine in Georgia used a coop very much similar to this. And this is a photo I grabbed off of the internet, suggesting the proper inlet systems directs air along the ceiling to help warm it up, and so they're not getting that blast of cold air on them like Jeff was talking about.
Yeah, I mean, Rip, you never want your air coming in below knee level, right? So knee level on you or I, you never want your air coming in at that bottom 18 to 24 inches, right? You always want the air coming in above that, because you don't want drafts. And I think you're going to talk about drafts a little bit anyway. So,
and another thing, if you have some sort of air inlet that has a vent on it or something, you know, the last time, 2 weeks ago, we were talking about predators, but those little aluminum vents, it's a good idea to put a piece of wire behind them so predators can't come in to your house that way. But you can also get some that you can just, they're round, probably about what, Jeff, 6 inches or so, and they have an adjustment that you can control the amount of air by twisting the outside of it. But drafts, you know, that's what's going to get your birds, make them sick. That's what's going to cause frostbite for you. I know we had a question about large fowl and their combs, particularly single combs. They can get frostbite, but it's usually because there's a draft situation going on in connection with humidity in the coop, and you want to keep that humidity down as low as you can probably get it in that situation. And I think, Jeff, you had a video about a quick and easy way I think you wanted to share to clean out the coops.
Yeah, you want to do that now? When did you? Yeah, Karen's in control.
All right.
She's large and
Can you tell us what we're looking at, Jeff, before we start?
So, and I stole this idea from Pasture Life Farm down in Florida, and I helped them develop it. But basically, we're using 2 billboard tarps, one underneath, one on top, and then put the bedding on top of that. And you can, I believe this is a 10 by 12 building. I'm not sure that Carol says, but it's a 10 by 12 building. But just watch how quickly she can remove the bedding from the entire chicken coop all at one time. And there's no pitchforks, shovels, or rakes involved in this process. So,
hi, this is just a show to show you the best way, in my opinion, to maintain and clean your coop. As you can see, it's billboard vinyl on the floor, and I also have chips and peat moss. Underneath, there you can see the vinyl. I'm just going to show you how to clean this coop lickety-split. Okay, as you can see, we've cut a hole in the door, or made a door with the siding. But Jeff also suggested that I just cut this whole side. So then I just raise it up when I get ready to clean. So now you can see I've got the whole side raised. You can see I've just flipped those up and I have little latches to hold them. Now I'm going to drag the tarp out. You can see as I go, I kind of fold it in on itself, because then I will drag it to my compost pile. So then with the things in the corners, which if you would tack the vinyl up, you wouldn't have this. You can either use a broom or a shop vac to get rid of all that. So when you have this all off and you put it back, it's a good time to spray it. Sorry. It's a good time to spray it with ivermectin or permethrin, Electror, PFT, but I had just recently done that. You just lay this out. Looks really good. Here's what it looks like before I put the shavings and peat moss back in.
That was an eye opener for me the first time I saw that. It really was.
I mean, it saves a lot of time. I mean, you know, if people like buckets and wheelbarrows and shovels and hoes and rakes, that's fine. I mean, we should have exercise in our life. But, you know, the biggest challenge when I was a kid growing up and whenever I've had poultry, cleaning out the chicken coop was always something I really didn't enjoy. So, you know, I saw this on a mobile chicken coop. Like I said, I help friends down in Florida. You know, they have a mobile brooder. And I'm thinking, well, why wouldn't that work for people that have a chicken coop in their backyard? Right. And sure enough, you know, so I suggested it to Carol and she put it all together and there it is. Right. So, you know, in 5 minutes, she had all the old bedding out and removed. And, you know, if that used billboard tarp gets all messed up or something, just lay it out there, hit it with the pressure washer, garden hose, whatever, right? You can clean it off pretty quick and get it right back in there, replace the bedding, and you're back in business in, you know, 10 or 15 minutes tops, right? I never cleaned a chicken coop in my life in 15 minutes, right? And it didn't matter what size the flock was. It always took a lot longer than 15 minutes. So I thought I'd share that. We're coming into winter. You know, the birds are going to be cooped up. You know, if you got a way to put that system into use, I think you're going to love it. And you can get used billboard tarps. If you search on it, you can get usebillboardtarp.com, I think. Right? And you can get them shipped right to you. They're pretty big size. They're UV protected. They're heavy duty. They're made to be out in the weather. So those tarps ought to last you several years.
And you can cut them and they don't shred where you cut them. That's my favorite part is that they're.
Yeah.
Plus, some of them have a gecko on them. I like my gecko ones. Yeah. All right. Sorry, where were we, Rip?
We were talking about coop cleaning. Let's go. The one thing I wanted to talk about while we're on coops is fire safety, because every year sadly I see several folks experience losing almost, and sometimes their entire flock, from coop fires. And invariably it happens during cold weather. They're using heaters or heat lamps, and if not done properly, those things can cause a fire in a minute. And it can happen in the spring too when you're brooding a lot of baby chicks. Is that, well, let's run through that slide presentation, Karen.
Okay.
This is a picture of a friend of mine barn that was lost, and probably 90% of her birds were in that barn. She also kept horses in there. I don't think any of the horses were lost, but she lost. It set her back numerous years in her breeding plans and efforts. Um, and it was caused by an electrical issue. A heat lamp fell and broke, landed on the bedding and started a fire. So if we go on to the next slide, you can see what remains of that barn the next morning. Even damaged their horse trailer sitting out next to it. And this is a tragic situation. So please, 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 you know, I do not recommend heaters for most folks. I know some of you up in Canada and Alaska live in areas where you almost have no other option. But I did find this little fire safety tip designed specifically for chicken coop fires. And I'll make sure I post this over on the Poultry Keepers 360 group. So if you use a heater, you want to make sure you remove any cobwebs from the heater. Make sure that it's properly secured. If you've got the little aluminum lamps around with the clip-on spring-loaded holder, that thing's about as worthless as air brakes on a gopher turtle. They don't trust them. Sorry, Karen. My countryism came through. And don't use an extension cord. If you're going to use one, plug it into an outlet. Extension cords will cause you problems. I saw a friend of mine up in Alabama, went by their house and they were heating their chicken coop and with a bunch of fairly young birds in there. And they had this extension cord running through the window and into the coop, all across to the other side to a heater, and lined up very neatly like blackbirds on a telephone wire, or all these little baby chicks sitting up there on that wire. And that's, I guess, fine when they're small, but if there's any weight to them, they can pull that thing down in a heartbeat. Keep flammable materials away from the heat sources. That's and you know, really, this all boils down to common sense. This is not rocket science. Use bulbs with covers to protect them from dirt. Dust will collect on these heat lamps, and that can catch fire and cause problems. If you're going to use electrical heaters of some sort, use those that are rated for agricultural use. They're a little bit heavier duty, and they take some of the situations that we would encounter in our coops and our barns into account when they design those. Plan ahead. How many of you have a fire extinguisher in your poultry coop? Probably not very many. I know that I would probably be one of the guilty ones and not have a fire extinguisher. And install a camera system to monitor your chickens safely. I know Karen's got a great setup. I think for entertainment, she used to watch TV, and now she just turns on the Wi-Fi and watches chickens. But but again, it's just common sense and using good judgment. Next, any of y'all have anything you want to add to coops?
Let's put up some comments, because like you said, I certainly don't have any. I'm in North Carolina. We've got 10 days of winter here that are under 20 degrees, you know, that don't get up over that. So Scott says he's used heat lamps for almost 12 years. You got to secure them right and change that bulb every month. So that might be something that people don't normally do, is change the bulb. Yes. They're like, oh, it still works.
That's excellent advice, Scott. And
I know that a lot of the Tractor Supply bulbs are falling out of the actual metal sockets.
Yes,
like
those are not very long lived. Those bulbs, the little red light bulbs, are just not very long lived anyway. So that's excellent advice to change them out every month. Just mark it on your calendar and go for it.
Beverly, up there in Saskatchewan, says that they don't all heat their coops. So insulation, ventilation, bedding, south windows, and the right number of birds for space. I will say, I don't have, this is not statistically proven, but my frostbite on my single comb large file males seems to happen more in my less crowded coops than in my smaller full coops. Like when I have 10 birds in my 12 by 12, they're more likely to have frostbite than my 5 birds in my 5 by 5. Do you know what I mean? Like, so I feel like, is it the birds themselves that are heating up the space, or
Yeah.
I don't know. I just always found that backwards.
I'm going to defer to you and Jeff on that because, like I said, I'm in Central Florida and don't encounter these issues a lot.
You don't know what frostbite is down there, Rip.
You're probably right.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. I don't think anybody else has anything specific about that, so we'll. Let me just. This is a Jim, and he's somewhere where they see negative 60 degrees for weeks at a time in the winter. So he's got 10-foot ceilings in his barn, I assume. And so does that change? I mean, they're in a 12 by 24 stall inside the barn. So does the height of the barn help with air exchange, Jeff? Or
Well, it does. I mean, if you walk into a lot of chicken coops, you're going to find that they're just tall enough for the average human to walk in there, right? 6, 7, maybe 8 feet. So it does. And, I mean, I'd have to see the layout. He said they're in stalls. So, whatever the sidewalls are, there's got to be some natural air movement going on in there. So the sidewalls are acting as a baffle. The ceiling's helping. Higher ceiling height at 10 feet. It's uncommon to go into a chicken coop that's got 10-foot ceilings, right? It's just not, it's not normal to see that. That's a great thing. So I think he's got a combination of things going on there. I wouldn't say it's just the 10-foot ceilings, but I definitely think that's part of it.
Craig has now told us what he doesn't do. So he heats his building and filters the air. Tries to get to less birds before Thanksgiving. But then, so he opens the doors when he can, basing on what that, but here's the thing I want to know. He quit use heat lamps for brooding about 6 years ago. I have a box full of bulbs I will never use. Craig, you should get rid of that box full of bulbs. But what do you use to heat in the winter if you're not using heat lamps? Do you literally have a heater? Like, in which case, I'm guessing you don't have pine shavings.
I believe he does have heaters installed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just normal heat your building heaters.
I know he's told me he tries to keep it at about 40 degrees when it's really cold, so he doesn't have to worry about the water freezing over and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And
he has a Cadillac set up.
All right. I think and I'm going to say, Beverly, that was my concern. The humidity causes the frostbite. So you would think the more confined the birds were and the smaller the space, you would think more humidity would build up, not the big open one with very few birds. You would think there would be no humid buildup. But anyway, maybe my stuff is just wrong, which wouldn't be surprising. All right. Okay. So somebody's saying oiled filled radiator type heaters. So I'm not sure who said that though. So I'm going to go. All right, Rip, you got more for us?
I wanted to cover watering next. But again, I'm going to have to probably defer to you and Jeff on that because, I've had to deal with fount water is getting frozen and you got to bust the ice out of them. But as far as the use of heated water bases or dealing with a run of low pressure cups or nipples, I've never encountered that. So, Jeff, what's your advice?
Rip, I kick myself oftentimes that I did not take a picture, but I basically built a wooden box so that the lip of my fount water, and I had one of the octagon plastic fount waters for my birds, right? And so I built about an 8-inch high box, and In that box, then I use the foil-faced styrofoam insulation. I put a light receptacle in there, regular old porcelain like you'd use in the house, cheap light. And I ran a cord, not an extension cord. I ran a cord, one cord, all the way from that box to that. And I just ran a 60 watt. And if it was going to get really cold, I'd put a 100 watt incandescent light bulb under there. I set that fount up there on the edges, you know, and of course I trimmed it up and I put corners on it so all the heat didn't escape. What was neat is I could look out my bedroom window and if I saw that pink glow, because you had the red bottom and the white sides, if I saw the pink glow when I put my head on the pillow at night, then I knew that there was enough retained heat in there, in that 5 gallons of water, that the water would not be frozen by morning. Okay. That was as simple as it gets. It's just a box with a light fixture, you know, incandescent light bulb. Worked great. I was happy with it. The only thing I'm going to tell you is if you're not careful pulling the water off and you spill water on a hot incandescent bulb, you're going to be replacing a lot of bulbs. Okay. So that's...
What about fires? You all just told us not to put light bulbs in our coops. Now you're putting it in the bedding, basically.
No, it's in a box. It's in its own box, right? I had a bottom on the box. I had, you know, so that's what I did. That's just what I did, okay? And other than going through, you know, bulbs because the water hit it, then it worked great. I mean, I really enjoyed it.
I recall seeing a drawing in an old poultry, I don't remember if it was a book or magazine, but they used an inverted flower pot with a light bulb inside of it, just a red terracotta flower pot, a big one. But I could also see some issues with that because it's not totally contained. But
the plug-in dog bowls that heat up, like, so there's, you know, so those are nice for anybody who has multiple, like if you want to do pan, you know, open pan drinking, if that's what they're used to. It's just
yeah, for larger flocks where you want to service, you know, like 100 or more birds, a recirculation system where you have one tank that automatically fills, right, from a garden hose or however you want to fill it, but it's constantly running. So they have a pipe going from one to the other with the top cut out of it, so the birds can chase running water, right? So they got a pump in one end and they got a sump pump returning it from the other end. So it's just constantly, but you got to have electric. But that running water down to even 15 degrees has been able to, and they've got fairly large reservoirs at either end. You know, they're holding 30, 35, 40 gallons, you know, at both ends of that system. But the hens love it. You know, I mean, every time I spilled water, the hens chased the water across the ground.
Oh, absolutely.
So, yeah. So,
Jeff, what about, and this may be something y'all don't even use up there, but the little nipple waterers, you know, that screw into the PVC pipe, or the little cup style that screw in as well?
Oh yeah, we use them all up here. I mean, you see everything, but we will get enough winter that nipple and cup type waters, you know, are going to freeze up. Now, one way around that, again, using a larger reservoir of water, a lot of my customers are now, they have the horizontal nipple. So you can actually mount it on the side. So they'll get some of those large, they call them an IBC tote, holds 250 gallons of water. And they'll use that and they'll go around the edge and they'll put a bunch of those horizontal nipples in there. That volume of water exposed to direct sunlight through the day gets warm enough that they won't freeze up overnight. And that's been working well all the way up into Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, you know, even further north than me. So that's been a pretty good system.
And if you've got an enclosed water source like that, can you put in the heaters they use for cows and horses, or fish tanks, or you know what I mean, like in the big,
Yep, you could.
So we don't have anything magic about water. In North Carolina, here's what you do when the water freezes. You just put more water out and it'll be thawed in a few hours. Yeah. So
That's
honestly,
fine.
I go out there with my shovel and the night before I fill them all the way to the top. And then in the morning I go and take the top inch of ice off and then they have water. It's magic. But that's North Carolina. That doesn't work everywhere. You'd have a whole pan of ice where you are. All right, are we ready to get into what we need to feed them?
Yes, and Jeff, I want to ask a couple of questions right off the bat, but I know some folks are a big fan of feeding hot mashes in the morning. Is there any advantage to that?
No.
I know it probably makes them feel better.
Right.
But
It does. It does. Look, chickens like wet mash, right? They for whatever reason, they like a wet, wet sticky feed that all holds together. So, if someone has time to do that, that's great. I mean, is there an advantage? Can you put a number on that or an advantage to that? No. And, even if you fed them hot oatmeal every morning or a hot mash every morning, the warmth of that mash is when they eat it is only a temporary, kind of warm them up, like me drinking a cup of coffee in the morning. It's good for a half an hour and then it's kind of gone. So it's pretty much the same difference. But look, it's not a bad thing. So I don't want anybody I don't want any hate mail tomorrow, right? It's perfectly fine. Depending on how many birds you got and whether or not you can actually do that, then, do it. There's nothing wrong with it. Okay. But there's no advantage to it either. So just so we're clear, right? There's no significant advantage to it.
what about, and I was always told when I was getting into this hobby, if you're going to have cold weather, throw them some grain just before they go to roost.
And I used to believe that too. And look, nobody knows the exact amount, right? And, up here when we had, teens and 20s, I would do that too. I would give them some scratch grain, right before they went to roost, thinking that was going to help warm them up. And it probably does a little bit, right? I'm not saying that that's a wrong way to do it. But, I've learned a lot since then. And these birds can tolerate temperatures, like I said earlier, down into the teens, not a problem, right? And, I think we're more concerned about them than they are. Yes, frostbite for large single comb roosters is going to be an issue. Never ever saw frostbite on feet or toes or anything like that, right? It was always frostbite on the combs. And that, we might be able to manage that better, by getting the humidity out of there, controlling that air, how much, yes, they need air, but they need it at specific times. Like that fan should run right before they go to roost at night and then probably not run again until early morning when it's time for them to get off the roost. Okay. And they'll probably be fine that way.
And I know I've read and I've heard you say, but correct me if I'm wrong here, but don't chickens normally eat their largest portion of their daily food intake a little bit before they go to roost anyway?
Right. Yep. So, I kept chickens in the backyard. And look, I just had a common flock for fun. Okay. So don't start sending me questions. What breed did you have? What, how did you do at the show? There wasn't any of that, right? I had chickens to see, I tried to teach my daughter economics, right? Feed the chickens, get the eggs, sell the eggs, right? And that project failed, right? So the other part of it was I could sit in my backyard and I could observe the behavior of chickens in somewhat of a natural environment. Every day, no matter what time of year, you could set your watch by it. They were fed earlier in the day, but they all went to the feeder 1 hour before sunset and they tanked up. Their crops were full, right? Okay, then once they were full, they'd stand around, they'd kind of socialize, they'd preen themselves, you know, they'd just kind of maybe take a dust bath, whatever. But actually, they were all just kind of gradually migrating back to the roost, and their mind was already set. You know, at sunset, pretty much all my birds were on the roost, and it didn't matter which breed I had, right? Pretty close to sunset, they were all eyeballing their spot in bed, and that's. But yeah, they're going to eat 60 to 70% of their daily need in that end of the day, if they're allowed to act in their natural behavior.
Very good. Do birds need a different type of nutrition during the winter as opposed to the rest of the year? Or is it okay to kind of keep your program going?
You know, for 90% of the folks, you know, watching the show, unless you're like way north and you're, you know, maybe up into Canada somewhere, or even New York, you could supplement a little bit of extra, and I mean a little bit of extra corn or energy, or you can do a little bit. Just don't get carried away, right? So there's a huge amount of energy in things like corn and wheat and scratch grains and so on. You know, I mean, a quarter of an ounce, half an ounce is a lot of calories, and that's plenty, and only on the colder days, right? Don't get carried away. You know, we don't need fatty livers and internally fat birds, and right. So just don't get, but unless you're dipping down into the 20s, teens or less, I don't see any need for really making an adjustment. They're really fine down to, for sure, in the 30s, right? Don't just because you're cold and uncomfortable doesn't mean they are, right? So
all right.
Go ahead, Karen.
Go ahead.
Okay. Karen. Now, how are we balancing this? So you're saying we don't need to feed something to them specifically to keep them warm. But on the other hand, you're making me go through a lot of work to feed my birds differently in the winter than I do in the summer. So, because of how much more food they're going to eat.
Actually, right. So, look, their caloric intake requirement is going to going up and down based on temperature. What I'm more worried about is your heat of your summers is their intake is much lower. Okay. I'm trying to address your summers more than I am your winters, right? Your winters is kind of your normal feed, in my opinion. You know, the stress for you is more that summer heat, you know, 90s, 100s for weeks, months on end. Yeah, that's the hard part in your environment is, you know, they just don't really do well above 80, 85 degrees. And you're there for a long period of time. So,
I mean,
I had a hard time raising young birds when it would get hot. They just, you couldn't get them to eat. They just weren't hungry.
Right. I mean, a chicken eats for its caloric needs on a daily basis, is what we're told. This is what we're told, and this is what we're taught. You know, some of them just like to eat, so they're going to eat. They're going to overeat anyway. You know, in a free choice feeding situation. But yeah, honestly, most of the time, the other thing is they're never going to turn down a bright yellow piece of corn. So if there's some still available, they're going to have it, right? It's like having 2 desserts after supper. They just can't help themselves. Some birds are that way. They don't really need it. And so, yeah, I mean, we can do some adjustments. And I've put out that heat feed temperature chart, and it's more, you know, for the hot climates than it is the cold. And, you know, but we can make the adjustments. And the temperature is where they're living, not, I mean, you could step out at -10, but what's the temperature inside the chicken coop, right? Because of body heat, deep bedding, composting going on with the manure and everything else. It's probably not -10 in the chicken coop. So they're really resilient and they adapt well to their environments. So let's just not get carried away. I'm not saying don't supplement a little bit of cracked corn or scratch grain in the winter. I'm saying don't get carried away. So hopefully that answered your question, Karen. But yours is more, I'm more worried about the really low feed intake during the heat of the summer and maintaining the right nutrient levels. I don't worry about your birds in the winter, especially after you did that autopsy and showed us how much extra weight you're carrying.
Mine are self-insulated. Yeah.
We could take their feed away for a month and they'd still be fine.
Yeah.
Sorry.
All right.
Oh, man, that's too good. Jeff, I want to circle back just real quick because I just had something pop into my mind, and we talked about that earlier, and I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget to ask, but I better ask it while it's on my mind.
Okay.
In Carol's video, she talked about a combination of peat moss and shavings.
Right.
Is there an advantage to that, or just something she decided to do?
Well, I mean, it was something Carol decided to do too, but I can understand why. So peat moss by itself is crazy dusty. And if, you know, they can track the peat moss into the nest boxes, next thing you know, you've got peat moss stuck to the bloom on the egg, and then you got more egg washing to do. But a combination is probably really good in her situation. And for anybody with adult birds, I think it's an excellent combination personally, because the peat moss has much better absorbency, and the shavings are going to help hold down the dustiness of the peat moss. But the peat moss is going to do the majority of the work, just so you know, right? The peat moss is going to do, yeah, it's definitely going to do the lion's share of controlling ammonia, things like that.
Very good. I think the next thing that folks had been commenting they wanted to know about is the lighting in the winter. You know, if you're not concerned about eggs, then don't worry about providing supplemental lighting. But if you want your birds to lay and produce well, then yeah, you're going to have to bump up their lighting, because you want about 15, 16 hours of light for good egg production, and also for if you're breeding or want to start breeding, you're going to need that supplemental lighting not only to get eggs, but to get your males fertile as well. They need that as well. But the timing of lighting is really, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, that's all right. Some folks are messaging me, and some people choose not to light. They're going to let nature take its course, and that's fine. That's
understand, yeah.
I mean, if you want your eggs early, you want to move ahead in the schedule, you know, supplemental lighting is like Rip's talking about, is definitely the way to go. Sorry, Rip, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you didn't. That's fine. Yeah. The timing of when the lights come on, to me, is pretty important. I would much rather have the light come on early in the morning, go off during the middle of the day or whenever you've got good light outside, but then let the birds go to roost with the natural light. Because if you want to see pandemonium break out in a flock of birds, you just keep your lights going until after dark, and then boom, the switch turns it off, and panic ensues.
Don't do that. All your supplemental light should be at the beginning of the day.
Yes.
Should be added to the morning. And never more than 30 minutes per week. Okay. You can't go from 12 hours to 14 hours all at once and think you're going to do a good job. So you've got to fool them into believing that it's springtime and the days are gradually increasing. So
just like swapping out from one feed to another, do it a little bit at a time.
Do it a little bit at a time.
And the type of lighting, I've become a real fan of LED lights. And Karen shot some video for us that really illustrates you don't want a light that flickers, so stay away from fluorescent lighting. And Karen, share that video with them if you would, please. And it really illustrates a good point.
So, and I don't know they advertise some lights as non-flickering, but I believe that they've sort of proven that really does upset the birds. So however, this is my laundry room, so no birds were upset in this process. But so that's just me shining up at the ceiling. And so just with your iPhone, if you have lights you're planning on using, then I just switched over to the slow-mo on there, and you can see how much that flickers. You know, you don't have to do anything special with it. Just the slow motion. If you've got an iPhone, anything past 11, I think, has a slow motion setting on there. And you can see. So I also went down to my LEDs that I used to grow out my brooders this year.
That was great, Ellie.
And I did not put that up, but they flickered like crazy. So I drove my poor little birds just nuts.
She sent it to me, and it was painful for me to even watch the video. It was like being out on the Carnival Midway. Just
So I worried so much about getting the right wavelength of light, and didn't pay any attention to anything else, I guess. So we'll go back to the drawing board next year. But so far, my birds have survived it.
Yeah. Light flicker is extremely stressful for chicken. I mean, and you want the lowest flicker rate you can get.
I can only imagine a flock of Egyptian Fuyumis. They go panic-stricken at the drop of a hat. And some of the more flighty birds, it just really stresses them out. So please take that into mind when you're lighting your birds. That's all I have in the way of notes here, Karen. I know we have.
I want to say two things about lighting.
Go for it.
That make me feel better when I do it. So anybody who wants to light but secretly feels guilty about it, don't forget that birds, on the equator, they have the same amount of light at all times, and they don't drop dead at 3 years old because they've ruined their entire stack of eggs and they can't lay anymore. So every part of the globe has a different level of light. So we can do that. And then if you're on the Facebook page, I don't remember, Elizabeth Mills posted about it, that there have been some studies that supplemental light can actually be increased health, of the birds, not just to lay eggs and be productive, but can actually shown adding some supplemental light in the winter to actually boost their immune system, and make them a little bit hardier than they might have been without it. So, but of course, all our breeder birds are perfect and wouldn't need any immune system boosts. But, but I wanted to say that. I do have a question about one more thing, and I know that in general, northern fowl mites are more of an issue in the winter for people than they are in the summer. And I think some of it is heat related, but also some of it is how much confined the birds are. But is there in general more parasite problems in different times of year that we should make sure to get their dust baths ready or anything?
Yeah. I mean, I always see an increase in northern fowl mite infestations, usually starting in mid-September. Like right now, I'm starting to get the calls. You can get some in the summertime, but they're looking for a warm body. They're looking for a host to suck on all winter long. So yeah, I mean, dust baths are important all year long. They're like number 4 on the list, air quality, water quality, feed quality, and then dust bath, because it does something to their psyche and their mental well-being. And they're just way happier if they can do a dust bath.
That's on my to-do list, to refresh dust baths.
Yeah. I mean, birds do a lot better with a dust bath. And, it can be just as simple as, this isn't my recipe, but it can be as simple as, play sand and add a little bit of elemental sulfur to that. I mean, I like peat moss and some other things added to it. But yeah, I mean, dust baths are important, but you have to have something in there that the mites don't like. Something like that elemental sulfur doesn't take a lot, and that'll drive off the mites. or you can spray them with something chemical if that's your gig. I mean, I'm kind of more of the natural type person, but
I know the old timers used to rely on a lot of wood ashes, and that's bad.
yeah, I found that out by accident, right? A friend of mine used to bring his coal ashes over from his coal stove. I dumped them out in the chicken yard. Man, next thing I knew, they all ran over and ate a bunch, and then they're all buried in it all the way to the bottom of their eyeballs and their wattles, right? I mean, this didn't take long. I mean, they learned this behavior in less than an hour. I mean, they were all about it, right?
All right. So now that all the people want to tell us about, we do know that there are problems and dangers with wood ash, with sulfur, with everything respiratory they can ingest. So balance what you want to do, what works for you.
Yeah. And like I said the old timers. I didn't.
Yeah.
All right. Do we want to do? Were you done, Rip? Do we want to do any of these questions?
Yeah. Let's do some questions.
I'm going to go back to the very beginning in the ventilation. I just want to put this up because I feel like this is. I think this was Dennis way back then, and everybody's situation is different. But for a lot of people, if their goal is to wrap their runs with clear tarps and just leave a little bit open at the top, is that what we should be aiming for?
Well, you definitely want to have some ventilation, and I think Jeff's tips where he was talking about hanging the cardboard or some sort of baffle in the coop to kind of get that air stirring up. I think that would work. Yeah. I don't know whether
can we pick a temperature? Like if you're going to wrap your run in clear tarp, should your daily temperatures be below 0? What if your daily temperatures are in the 40s? I mean,
well, you get some greenhouse effect going on, and you could get them right toasty in there. Yeah. I've seen people have that problem here in Florida. They go out and wrap their coops in plastic, and suddenly they got a sweat box going on.
That's what I see in North Carolina. People cook their birds. The day gets to be 45, and then they discover that it's 85 in their coop. Yeah,
if not more.
Yeah.
At the fear of pissing someone off, clear plastic and poultry do never go along. Never ever go together, because when light passes through the clear plastic, it refracts and it does weird stuff. And it hits so it kind of separates the light beams, if you will, almost like a prism of some effect. And it'll drive birds crazy.
Unless they're Rhode Island Reds, then they're so lazy they don't really care.
I had not heard that, Jeff, but it makes sense.
Right. And then if you have them completely covered in a greenhouse situation, right, the light goes in and then it starts bouncing around all inside of there. You don't think about the reflectivity of that plastic, but now you got light beams going and the birds can't get away from it, right? It just, again, if you watch the behavior of the birds, every time I go into a greenhouse environment, I don't care if it's 15 degrees outside, a lot of those birds are looking for shade, right? They're actually trying to. Chickens are not direct sunlight fowl. They are not sun worshipers. Okay, so shade is important.
I've seen the setups where they have these high tunnel structures that were greenhouses at one time, plastic all over the world, and they've got a flock of chickens in there, and I'm thinking, whoa, that's got to be miserable for the birds.
I have a much higher cannibalizing rate in plastic structures than I do clear plastic structures.
I can believe that.
And any other, right? And they don't like the rustling of the plastic. So if you're in a windy environment and the plastic's not tight, right? If it rustles a little bit, that kind of freaks them out. I mean, these are all stressors on chickens. I know they're cheap and convenient. That don't make them right.
All right. We talked a lot about what birds could handle, but let me just real quick. Does the size of the bird matter very much? My gut would tell me that a little 1 pound serama or whatever they weigh is going to need a little bit warmer temperature than a
Yeah,
10-pound.
Yeah.
right, no doubt. Right.
Okay.
I mean, it doesn't have. It's not going to be the same as one of your 10-pound black Australorps or something like that. Right. I mean, right. That is a very truthful statement. So they are going to need more temperature consideration. They're still fine down into the 40s, low 40s. If you drop below 30, I'd start wanting to do something different because then you could get, a little bit of hypothermia. You could start losing body temperature, but they're still going to be good down into even the mid 30s, right? Even at that size.
And I know other breeds also have that problem. Sea bracts are fairly small and a little bit on the delicate side naturally anyway, and they need that supplemental heating.
All right. And I think these questions were a little bit about Carol's system of billboard tarps, but I think we could probably, I'm not sure if the just general, is it that deep bedding helps with the winter or if it's more just.
It does. It does because of the composting action. So the manure from the birds, mixed with the wood shavings or whatever their bedding is going to be generating some heat. So, deep bedding can be a plus in the wintertime. It's just a lot more to clean out in the spring. But as long as it's managed correctly, I have no problems with deep bedding. And it's a great system. The further north you go, I feel it's a better system. The deeper the bedding. So it is an insulator and it keeps them away from the ground temperatures.
Jeff, what about do you have to be more diligent with deep bedding around your waterers or in areas where you have more moisture tend to collect?
Yeah, and there was a post earlier. Carol actually put it in there. I never kept my feed and water in my bedded area. Okay. My birds, regardless of weather and temperature, have to come outside to eat and drink. They might not have to go very far, but they had to come outside to eat and drink. So it was funny as all get out. One winter morning, we had just gotten fresh 10, 12 inches of snow. Not very common for us here where I'm at, but all the birds stood at the doorway of the chicken coop looking at this funny white stuff because they had never seen it before. So I simply just spread out a little bit of straw that I had in the barn. So it was something familiar. They walked on it. They come out. Next thing I know, they're eating snow. They're playing in it. They're frolicking. They're having a great old time, right? It's just, they just didn't know what it was the first morning. But if they wanted food and water, they came outside to get it. Now, look, I was keeping black Australorps, barred rocks, Rhode Island Reds, even things like golden comets and sex links. But even my smaller birds, when we had a rogue group of bantams that somebody dropped off, they did fine. So they even in the middle of the winter.
All right, we're going to answer one nutrition question because it was very specific. You just need a yes or no. I'm kidding. But is brown rice and oatmeal good for chickens year round?
It's a lot of carbs. Not necessarily anything good for them. There's nothing, in moderation, it's not bad. But, I mean, it's not really adding anything to the diet. I mean, you're just carbing them up and be careful because you can make them fat. But.
All right. And then we didn't really get into it. We talked about it a little bit, but preventing frostbite on large comb birds. So you got that. And then Marie's wanting to know, what about oiling? Somebody else, what about Vaseline? Do you have, before we get to Dennis's, I think.
I used to use Vaseline or mentholatum. And I honestly couldn't tell any difference between using that and boxing my birds. I thought I've got, frankly, better results by boxing those big old males with the big single combs and large wattles in the show transport boxes. It was pretty well ventilated, but I didn't try to do anything after that.
I've now forgotten who this is, but they did say that they had some success with Musher's Secret. So just throwing that out for anybody who wants
That's something I know nothing about.
advice. Yeah.
Yeah, me either. That's a brand new one on me.
I'm guessing that's a foot thing for the dogs, to keep their foot. But let's see. I think we could probably call that a day.
Okay.
An evening.
An evening. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate it as always. I've had fun doing the show, and hopefully Karen and Jeff have as well. And we hope you enjoyed what we've presented to you, and you will come back for more in 2 weeks. So in the meantime, keep enjoying your birds, even if it's cold, and keep doing your studies and improving your flock. Thank you so much, and y'all have a good evening. Bye-bye, everybody.